Already know from before, we use the preterite for completed actions, actions with a specific beginning and a specific end. Okay, so this also includes one-time actions. For example, yesterday I went to the store. Okay, it's a very specific time. You know that I did it yesterday, has a specific time. I went to the store. That action is completed. I went to the store, it's over with. Okay, um, a lot of times we translate the preterite as ed, and sometimes it even occurs in a series of events. So, for example, yesterday I brushed my teeth, I showered, and I cooked breakfast. Okay, all of those end in ed, and it's a series of events telling you what I did in the morning. I cooked breakfast, I showered, and I brushed my teeth. Okay, so you can see a series of events, and you can see they're all ending in ed. Oftentimes you see these with transition words as well, like first I went to the movies, then we went shopping at the Pinnacle. Finally, we had dinner at Opry's. Okay, so you can see a series of events with some transitions there as well. Notice most of these are translated again as ed. Not always, because you have some irregular verbs like I ran, I swam, I watched. Well, I guess watched is not irregular, but you have some irregular verbs there. But generally, the preterite can be translated as ed. Okay, the imperfect, on the other hand, is sort of the opposite. You see the imperfect with habitual or repeated actions. Um, these very commonly occur with childhood, and they usually have some kind of indefinite time period. So when I was a kid, we used to go ice skating every Christmas. Okay? Well, every Christmas implies habitual or repeated actions. When I was a kid, cuando era niño, implies childhood. And there's an indefinite time period there. When I was a kid, well, how long was I a kid? We don't really know. Okay? So, indefinite time period. A lot of times, the imperfect tense is translated as used to. You may have noticed earlier in the video when we were talking about conjugating some of the sentence, I said she used to clean the bathroom every Friday. Well, how many Fridays did she clean the bathroom? We don't know. It's an indefinite time period. It's unclear. So that's an indefinite time period and also sort of a repeated action. Okay. In addition to used to, the imperfect tense is also sometimes conjugated as was or wereing. Was or wereing. Okay, so this brings me to another important point about interrupted actions and interrupting actions. So most commonly, whenever you see the imperfect translated as was or wereing, it usually occurs in a sentence where there's an interrupting action. So for example, we were watching TV when someone knocked on the door. Okay? We were watching TV would be the imperfect. Number one, because it's translated as was or wereing. Number two, because it's an ongoing action. Okay? We were watching TV when someone knocked on the door. Knocking on the door is a completed action. Okay, so notice we were watching TV. That's interrupted. Our watching of TV was interrupted by someone's knocking on the door. So the interrupted action in this case is imperfect. We were watching TV. Whereas the interrupting action, the completed action, is preterite. We were watching TV, imperfect, when someone knocked on the door. Preterite. Okay, you also see the imperfect used a lot with emotions and descriptions as well as ages. So when he was 15, once upon a time, those kind of things very commonly use the imperfect. So storytelling is where these really come into play, and you can really see the difference in the preterite and the imperfect. One of my favorite things to do with my in-person students in preterite and imperfect is to allow them to read Goldilocks and the Three Bears in Spanish and talk about why each tense may have been used in a certain circumstance or another. So you can see these here. So let's talk about why we use the preterite one more time. As I said, I'm going to give you a little acronym here to help you remember this. And this acronym is BOIST, B-O-I-S-T, BOIST. The B in BOIST stands for the beginning or the ending of an action. You often see these verbs used with the preterite. Comenzar, to begin. Empezar, which also means to begin or to start. And terminar, to end. Okay, so for example, el partido empezó a las 5. So the game began at 5. How many times can the game begin? Only once. That's preterite. Okay? El partido terminó a las 9. The game ended at 9. These things, beginning and ending, imply completed actions. Things can usually only begin and end once. Okay? So the B in BOIST, beginning or ending of actions. The O of BOIST stands for one-time actions. And this is where you see a lot of those preterite trigger words that we discussed in a previous video. Ayer, yesterday, that implies a specific time, which makes us use the preterite. Anoche, last night, again, a specific time. Anteayer, the day before yesterday. La semana pasada, last week. El mes pasado, last month. El año pasado, last year. All of those are very, very specific time periods. So you're going to use the preterite. So BOIST, beginning or ending of actions, one-time events. The interruption. I always love to tell a story here, and I always think of horror movies. I love horror movies, and particularly there's usually always a dumb blonde in every horror movie, right? So when the dumb blonde was walking down the street, she was abducted. Okay, so she was walking down the street. That's going to be an imperfect action because it's just continuously happening. She was walking down the street. Was or were, imperfect. And then she was attacked, or the killer attacked her. It's a one-time event. It's an interruption. The killer's attacking her interrupts that ongoing action of the walking. So your preterite is usually the action that does the interrupting. Okay, the killer snatched her. She was abducted. Those things are one-time events, and they're interrupting. So again, the preterite, BOIST, beginning or ending of events, one-time events, interruptions. Okay. We also use the preterite for a series of events, the S in BOIST, and these are when things happen one after the next. So I went to the store, I bought some milk, I got gas, and I went home. Okay, so a series of events all happening, boom, boom, boom. And then finally, transitions. You often see the preterite used with these transition words like primero, segundo, tercero, luego, entonces, por fin, por último. So you see these transition words commonly used. So first, second, third, then, finally, in the end, that kind of thing. Okay? So let's practice a little bit here. I'm giving you some sentences in Spanish. They're all in the preterite, as you can see. But I want you to tell me why I use the preterite in these sentences, and I want you to give me a reason from BOIST. For example, number 1, ayer yo hice la tarea. Yesterday I did my homework. Here we would use hice because this is a one-time thing. It's one of those pre-programmed words. One time I did my homework, and it was yesterday, ayer, specific time, completed event. Number 2 says, tú fuiste al mercado, compraste comida, regresaste a casa y cocinaste la cena. So you went to the market, you bought some food, returned home, and cooked dinner. Why might we use the preterite here? Hopefully you're saying T. There's a bunch of transitions in there. Or you might also say S, a sequence of events, which is probably the more correct of the two. You're seeing this series or sequence of events continuing. You went to the market, bought food, returned home, and cooked dinner. Number 3, nosotros terminamos de jugar. We stopped playing or we finished playing. This is probably the beginning or ending of an action because those verbs like terminar, empezar, and comenzar, you can only begin or end one time. Okay, so beginning or ending. Number 4, primero, él fue a la escuela, luego aprendió matemáticas y por fin regresó a casa a hacer la tarea. So, first, he went to school, then he learned math, and finally he returned home to do his homework. Why might we use the preterite here? Good. Hopefully you're saying that this is a transition. In some ways, this could also be argued as a sequence of events because it's telling you things that he did in a certain order. But obviously the transition words lead way to transition being the better answer here. Either way, you can see that the preterite should be used. Here's another great example. Number 5, ellos leían. They were reading in the imperfect tense. Ellos leían cuando el teléfono sonó. They were reading when the phone rang. They were reading. This is my ongoing action. When the telephone rang, right? The phone only rang once, likely, and it interrupted their reading. So this is an interruption, which would be in the preterite, whereas the ongoing action, the reading, is still in the imperfect. So hopefully that helps kind of give you an idea. So remember BOIST as our reason for using the preterite. Okay, I also have a cool little acronym for you for the imperfect, and this is UTOAD. UTOAD, U-T-O-A-D, as a reason why you would use the imperfect. The U in UTOAD stands for used to. We usually translate the imperfect as used to, like when I was a kid, we always used to go to the beach every summer, or we never went ice skating. Okay, so used to is our imperfect word here. You have some specific phrases that go along with the imperfect, such as siempre, always, nunca, never, todos los días, every day, cada año, every year, cada verano, every summer, or cuando yo era niño, when I was a kid. So, all of these are what we call those imperfect triggers, those words that you typically use with the imperfect tense. Okay, so UTOAD, the U is used to, the T is time, stating what time it was when something happened, like it was 8 o'clock at night, eran las 5 de la noche, when blah, blah, blah. Okay, so stating time, you usually use the imperfect. Now, remember back to Spanish 1, if we're saying it is a certain time, we say son las, unless it's 1 o'clock, and then we say es la una. Now, the imperfect still applies there. So we're using those bottom left and right boxes of ser, es, and son. When it becomes imperfect, we're using era or eran. So typically you're going to say eran las in whatever time. It was 5, eran las 5. It was 8, eran las 8. Unless it's 1 o'clock. And then you're going to say era la una. It was 1. Okay, so UTOAD, used to, and time. The O in UTOAD stands for these ongoing events. We talked about this with the horror movies and the interruptions. Usually the imperfect action is the one that gets interrupted. It's the ongoing action. So we were watching TV when someone knocked. Were watching is imperfect because it's was or wearing. And it's also imperfect because it's the action that gets interrupted. It's the ongoing action. The knocking, remember, we were watching TV when someone knocked. The knocked, ed, is preterite, whereas the was or wearing is imperfect. So UTOAD, we talked about used to and time, ongoing events. Age is also generally imperfect. So stating how old someone was when something happened, he was 5 years old when they moved to California. He was 5. Tenía 5 años. He had 5 years. And then finally, the D in UTOAD is description, describing what things or people used to be like in the past. So just like before, I'm going to give you a series of events here. And we're going to go through and talk about why these are going to be imperfect from UTOAD. So, eran las 4 cuando tú llegaste. So it was 4 when you arrived. Why might we use the imperfect from UTOAD? What reason did you say? Yeah, hopefully T, time. Ellos tenían 8 años cuando ocurrió el 11 de septiembre. So when 9/11 occurred, they were 8 years old. Why might you use UTOAD here? Yeah, hopefully age. Age is what you're saying. Number 3, nosotros siempre tocábamos el piano. So we always used to play the piano. There's a few different reasons why you might say this. On my paper, I said used to because that's how it's translated. Remember that siempre also is a trigger word for the imperfect. Siempre, nunca, todos los días, all those things are usually trigger words. Number 4, tu gato era simpático y grande. Your cat was nice and big. Okay, that's a description. He was big and he was nice. Well, how long was he nice? We don't know. How long was he big? We don't know. He could have lost weight. It's unclear. And number 5, we see the opposite of what we saw before. Ellos leían cuando el teléfono sonó. They were reading when the phone rang. Was or wearing is obviously imperfect. Why from UTOAD might you have chosen leían? Good. Hopefully you're telling me it's an ongoing event. It's the action that gets interrupted. They were reading, which was interrupted by the phone's ringing. Okay? Hopefully you're feeling pretty good about those things. I have just one last thing I want to do with you here. I've given you some sentences and they're mixed together between the preterite and the imperfect. You need to select the correct form in either the preterite or the imperfect, and then you need to tell me why from UTOAD or BOIST you might have used these things. So number 1 says that yo siempre blank la tarea. In this case, siempre, always, is an imperfect trigger. So yo siempre hacía la tarea. I always used to do my homework. We're using hacía in this case because it is imperfect and it's unclear when I used to always do my homework. So I'd like for you to go ahead and pause this and give numbers 2 through 5 a try. Okay, now that you've had a moment to try these, number 2 gives you yo hice or hacía and then la tarea anoche. So I did la tarea, the homework, anoche, last night. Last night is a specific time, so you know we're going to be using the preterite. What's my reason from BOIST for using the preterite? Yeah, good. Hopefully you're saying it's a one-time thing. Anoche is my trigger word. Yo hice la tarea anoche. Number 3. I don't know what's wrong with me in numbers today. Number 3. Tu blank música cuando Paco llamó. So you blank music when Paco called. You're saying that you were listening to music. So again, was or wereing should be my imperfect option. So I should be using escuchabas here. And it is an ongoing event in this case. It's the ongoing action that gets interrupted. You were listening to music when Paco called. Finally, number 4, it says that Tomás either tuvo or tenía so many years, which are now covered up, 5 años. So Tomás either tuvo or tenía 5 años cuando el accidente ocurrió. So Thomas was 5 years old when the accident occurred. We're referring to Thomas's age, which is generally imperfect. So Tomás tenía 5 años. And then last one, number 5. Ellos blank la tarea. They blank their homework. And the verb empezar means to begin. You may recall you generally only begin things one time, which means this should be preterite. Ellos empezaron la tarea because of beginning or ending. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of practice. As we go back this week, I'm going to have you in some of your activities doing these in English first. So let's talk about these. When I was 15, I visited Ecuador. When I was 15 should be preterite or imperfect. Good, it should be imperfect. You're talking about my age. So when I was 17, I visited Ecuador. How many times did I visit Ecuador? Once. When was it? When I was 17. It's a specific time. So visited, ending in ed, is going to be the preterite. Whereas I was 17, the imperfect, because you're was or wereing and you're talking about age. Okay. While Grayson was buying shoes, Blaine was looking at hats. Both of these in this case are translated as was or wereing. So while Grayson was buying shoes, imperfect, Blaine was looking at hats, also imperfect. Okay, number 3. Riley was walking his dog when the car hit him. Riley was walking his dog, minding his own business. That's an ongoing action, okay? He was worrying, it's ongoing. That has to be good. Hopefully you're saying imperfect. Riley was walking the dog. When the car hit him, how many times did the car hit? Hopefully only once. Okay, it's a completed action. It's finished. So this is going to be the preterite. Riley was walking the dog when the car hit him. Okay, now let's look at this in Spanish. Yo leía cuando blank mi amigo. Yo leía. I was reading cuando blank mi amigo. I was reading when my friend called. My friend only called once. This is the preterite. It is the interrupting action. So ongoing, leía, in the imperfect, I was reading when he called. Interrupted my reading. Let's look at one more, then I'm going to let you try. Number 2 says that cuando yo era niño, when I was a little boy, yo siempre blank en la piscina. When I was a little boy, I always blank in the pool. I'm talking about childhood here, which is an imperfect trigger anyway, as is the word siempre, also an imperfect trigger. So when I was a little boy, I used to swim, also translated as used to, so definitely imperfect, in the pool. So when I was a little boy, I always used to swim in the pool. Imperfect. I'd like for you to go ahead and take a moment, pause the audio, and give numbers 3, 4, and 5 a try, please. Okay, now that you had a moment to try these, you can see in number 3, it says, primero, first, él jugó los videojuegos. He played some video games. Y luego, and then, él blank la tarea. So first, he played some video games. Then, he did his homework. There's a few clues here that should tell you this is the preterite. You have primero and luego, which are both transition words. You also have a preterite statement in the beginning, which is a hint. And you can see that this is sort of a series of events. He played video games and then he did his homework. It should be preterite with hizo. Number 4. Nosotros compramos los regalos, regresamos a casa y comer la cena. So we bought the presents, returned home, and then ate dinner. This is a series of events. We bought, in the preterite, the presents. We returned, in the preterite, home. And then we ate dinner. Should be preterite with comimos because it's a series of events in the preterite. Number 5. Tú terminar el examen primero. You finish the exam first. Obviously, beginning and ending, things like finishing, can only happen once. So this should be the preterite, terminaste.